Nishant Ismani, and this is Fulbright Women Podcast Season 2. It's been our pleasure to bring to you 20 new brilliant women who have been pushing the boundaries in their fields and lives and serving as inspiration to so many around them. Joining our last episode of the season today is Rabia Qureshi. Rabia did a master's in architecture with a focus on sustainable and ecological design from Kansas State University and is currently teaching as an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture, UET Lahore. Let's just get right into it, Rabia, because I have so many questions to ask. There's so many things to talk about. I think the first thing that I really want to start with is, do you remember the first time you had the realization about the need for energy efficient and sustainable architecture in Pakistan?
Yes. So it was during my undergraduate program in architecture that I got familiarized with the concepts of energy efficient architecture and sustainable design. But at that time, my understanding of sustainability was limited, and it was just mainly focused on energy efficiency and the building and what kind of active passive techniques we could adapt to make it more energy efficient. For example, the use of solar panels or water harvesting or geothermal heat exchange or daylighting, ventilation, all of these things. And as we know, and we have been experiencing this for so many years, that Pakistan is undergoing an energy crisis, which is growing every day. And at that time as well, we could obviously feel the effects because of all these power shutdowns that were happening throughout the day. And we are clearly not able to meet the energy needs of our increasing population. So I also learned as an architecture student that buildings are a major consumer of energy. A big chunk of our energy demand comes from the building. So naturally, architecture and architects have a role to play in bringing down or controlling that demand. And that is why I thought that sustainable design could be a solution to this energy crisis that we're facing. And that is when I decided to apply on the Fulbright and go to the US to do a master's in architecture that specifically specializes in sustainable and ecological design.
You did mention that you had, initially a limited understanding of what it really means to have, sustainable architecture, efficient architecture, energy efficiency, and all right. So I guess my next question to you would be, how did your perspective change about sustainability, energy efficiency when you went to study in the US?
Right. So when I went to the US, I was exposed to all this new information and knowledge that really changed my understanding of sustainability. Like, I felt that I was looking at a really tunnel vision all this time, and sustainability is a much larger subject. And even though I was taking sustainability courses and doing my degree in the architecture department, I also took courses on sustainability from the geography department, the sociology department, and also from the business department. So, going to all these departments and looking at sustainability from all these different angles, I was able to look at a bigger picture of sustainability and draw all these connections between all these angles and the ways to look at sustainable design. So I began to understand how this modern society works and how is it that we got here and why are we facing these problems today, and what will happen if we keep on continuing with this way of life. So for me, the idea of sustainability no more was about just architectural strategies or techniques or, running some softwares and calculations, but it rather opened up my mind to an entire worldview, which is deriving our consumption-oriented society and this capitalist economy that lies at the root of these problems that we're facing.
So you mentioned that, you broadened your horizons further than, beyond architecture to understand the issue, I think, at the crux, right? Yeah. And you did say in the beginning of when you started talking about it, that you wanted to understand how is the world functioning and what are the challenges, and if we continue to function the way we are functioning, where are we heading, right? So explain it to us, help us understand what were some of your key takeaways when you were looking at how is the world functioning and what's wrong with all the way that, we are going about it.
Right. So, well, I learned that it's after the first industrial revolution that the society changed. We moved from an agrarian society towards mass production with the help of these machines and with the help of all these industries. And that's when industrial architecture also, prevailed. And that revolution played an integral role in laying the foundation for modern society and also the emergence of the capitalist economy, because now consumption was becoming our way of life, a way to satisfy our ego. And we were told that we are supposed to consume, we are supposed to buy, we're supposed to shop, go shopping, buy, right? And that would be something that would help our economy, that would help our GDP, that would increase our wealth. So everybody's being told to go buy and go shop and go consume, right? So when we're shopping, it's something to wonder about when you're buying a product, even if it's architectural, building materials, or if it's anything of, something that we use. So where is that thing coming from? How is it being made? What is the cost that the planet or the environment is paying to make that happen, right? And the first step to making a product or anything is natural resource exploitation, right? So we drive our resources from our planet, and we live on a finite planet. So we have limited resources, and we're cutting down trees, we're using up all our water, we're digging mountains, we're killing animals. And in the last 3 decades alone, we have consumed 1/3 of our Earth's natural resources. So that is a pretty alarming speed. Like, a man has been here for millions of years, but it's only in these past decades that we have increased our consumption at such a high rate. And once we have those resources, we've taken them out of the earth, we take them to the industries, where comes the second stage of production, right? So you have all these toxic chemicals that we're using to make products, and we have this water waste, we have air pollution, and we finally are able to produce that product with all of that processes. And then comes the third stage, which is, you take it to the store and you tell people, go buy it, keep buying, keep consuming, consume, burn, replace, discard, consume again. And just, that cycle has to just keep on going faster and faster so that the materials keep on flowing and flowing and flowing, right? So we, you would also know this, and we all know this, that we keep hearing from our elders, from our grandparents, about the values of the past, of how everybody was about stewardship. The values were about, thrift, taking care of things, making things last. But in our current situation, in our current society, we are more about encouraging consumption, right? Buying more and more and more. So, and I realized that this change and the shift, it's all planned. So, the idea, so I learned about the idea of planned obsolescence, which is basically something that has encouraged us to buy more and more.
I understand that. I get the issue, but I kind of want to take it under the context of, let's say, architecture, right? What are your, as an expert, how do you think architecture can look at this issue where we're abusing the natural resources and we may soon be running out of them if we keep going at the pace that we are going at? How can architecture help us solve the issue?
Right. So I think that architecture, we all live in buildings and we all live in cities, right? So architecture and urban design and interiors, they are a major contributor in our lifestyle. The way we build is the way we live. right? So if we start building in sustainable ways, and if we start using sustainable materials, we start using, natural, renewable resources, and then we also, sustainability is no more just about the it is about the function of the building, but it is also about bringing happiness to us, and we're learning that even though we're consuming so much more than we were doing before, and we have so much more stuff and lifestyle is so much more better, our happiness has not increased, right? So it is not just about using those flat, perfect materials and all of that, but it's also about bringing that sense of place, that happiness, that connection with nature, all of these things, and the aesthetic value, the beauty, the universe, to feel, the space has to be pleasing to give us that happiness as well, and also a sustainable living style.
So basically, you're talking about the happy medium between the aesthetics and the actual utility. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if we look at from the lens of aesthetics and the utility, and we look at the architecture in Pakistan, how do you? I'm sure living in Pakistan, you must be observing so much architecture and buildings around you. Do you look at them from this lens? Obviously, you do. What are some of your key takeaways?
Right. So like I mentioned before, we are going through an energy crisis, and our buildings are consuming more energy, and we need to work towards bringing that down. Other than that, other things that I feel is that we are, obviously, because we're using machines, we're using air conditioning, and which is depriving us of our connection to the outside world. And a consistent indoor environment, it cuts us off from the outside world, and it brings in no social, cultural, or aesthetic richness to a place. And indoor environments are isolated, and they cut off our connection with nature. And we know through a lot of research that human beings need to be connected to nature in order for their well-being. Right. And so if you look at our traditional architecture, if I were to just talk about houses, for example, we see in our old traditional, like the traditional wall city of Lahore, we see courtyard houses, right, that we call havelis. And even the smaller ones, that are not that large in scale, they also focus on courtyards. So that kind of brings in nature and connects people in a different way. But when you go to the West, you see that they have these detached, semi-detached houses that we are now constructing, and the design that we're following, right? So I do feel that we're sort of following, we want to be like the West, and so we're just trying to be like them without really thinking about what is best for us, considering our situation and our resources, and that we're a developing nation with limited resources. And, our climate is different, our culture is different, all of these things. And so globalization is obviously a reason why we're moving away from traditional architecture. And there is a standardization of built environments, right? So when we have standardization, you lose that cultural and regional identity. And it's a big challenge for architects today, because you have products that are pre-engineered, right? Or the industry is making them in specific sizes, in specific ways, right? And that leaves very less room for designers to explore and create when, sort of the industry is already dictating that, hey, these are the materials, and these are the panels, and these are the sizes that you can use. Right. So when we're using those same building materials and same styles globally all across, the world, there's very little consideration for the region. And that, I believe, is a big challenge to achieve sustainable living.
Thank you so much for addressing that, because I kind of wanted us to talk about that in detail, that obviously there is a huge connection between regional aesthetics and the sustainability of resources, right? And you mentioned courtyards, right? Verandas, courtyards, rooftops, those walls. I remember these special these designs in the walls that have like you can see through them, those combed walls, whatever you call them in the architectural language, right? Yeah, so those things for ventilation, perhaps, right? There was so much wisdom and thought that went into the architecture to understand the regional, to understand the regional climate, perhaps, right? And you did say that, the globalization, the westernization of our buildings, let's just talk about Pakistan, right? The westernization of architecture that is leading towards more harm than good for us, right? When you and I are sitting here talking about this, weren't there people before us in architecture, in Pakistan, in developing countries, wherever in different countries, thinking about this? Like, where was the sensibility of people of, being conscious about these practices? What went wrong?
Right. So it comes back to the same thing, the same ideology of the modern society. We want to consume more, we want to build more, we want to construct more, and then we want to be very, very modern, right? So like Pakistan also aspires to be like the West, aspires to be like the developed nation. Right. And in order to encourage consumption in the society, like I mentioned before about planned obsolescence, right? So planned obsolescence is when products are purposely designed to have a very short lifespan. Right. So, for example, we see that there's a new version of your car coming in every year, a new version of your phone. The fashion is changing, your clothes are changing, the shoes are so you have perfectly fine clothes or perfectly fine shoes, but you need to go buy new ones because now they're outdated. The fashion is changing and media is telling you, oh, you're outdated. And same applies with buildings as well. Building materials, architectural styles, construction methods, they're changing. Building materials are new building materials are coming in, and they're being imported, and we're being told that because it's the modern society ideology now that we need to consume more and we need to build more and we need to all of this stuff. So I do feel that it's more about how the society is working, and obviously architecture has been impacted in that way as well. And then the reliance on machines. The air conditioning has obviously changed our architecture as well, because in like you were saying about ventilation and screens, right? So at that time, the energy need of that building was very, very less as compared to what it is now, because when we're placing ACs inside our building, they need to be designed in a different way. They need to be enclosed, Yeah.
Some may argue, and have you heard people, create this counter argument that yes, ventilation would have worked in the past when, the global climate change, that we are going towards wasn't as bad as it is now, given like the kind of heat that we experience in our part of the world, right? That wasn't there, say, 20 years back. So the whole reliance on ventilation, on wind, on the temperature, outside temperature, made sense back then. Now some may argue it doesn't make sense anymore. What do you have to say about that?
Well, that I would have to disagree with that, because I do feel as a designer, it is our role to come up with a solution for that. And the solution is not to start increasing our energies and start, making more waste. That is not the solution, because if we start keep on consuming the way we're consuming, the earth is going to run out of its resources. And climate change is here. It's not something that, we're expecting in the future. It's right here. And Pakistan is in the top 10, 20 countries of the world that are most impacted by climate change. And we see that, like, with the heat wave right now, with the floods that are happening because of, the glaciers that are melting, and all of these things that are happening that we see. And so we know that climate change is here and we are running out of our resources. So we need to come up with solutions. And you're right, I agree with that point that, because of the heat wave, it becomes very difficult to achieve that temperature, a thermal, environment inside when we have such a, heat wave going on outside. But yes, that I believe is a challenge for us as designers and architects to come up with a solution.
Do you find yourself or do you have these conversations in your community about these challenges and coming up with creative solutions, perhaps?
Yes, yes, of course. I do think that this is a very important topic that is being discussed and talked about. And I, because also teach architecture, and we do discuss it with our students, and we have courses specifically designed for energy efficient architecture and sustainable design to discuss these issues with our students as well, who are going to be future architects. And also in the architecture community, that we need to come up with solutions, and we need to see what we can do and how we can make our environments more pleasing, more livable, more life enriching with limited resources, because that is the way forward.
Before we move any further, I'm thinking about one thing, Rabia, and I think it happens in all the fields. There is theory and the best practices in theory, and then there's the practicalities of it. And oftentimes, what I have seen is that we all know what the best practices should be, what are the best ways to go about, but then there's so many challenges that that come in the way that we cannot somehow translate that best idea into, let's say in the case of architecture, a building. Are there those kind of challenges in your field? And if so, like, can you talk about some of them?
Yes, there are. There are definitely many challenges, like the one that I mentioned before about pre-engineered building materials. So, right, so there's one limitation there. The industry is sort of dictating the materials that we have available. And the second is, the client, right, the user who's trying to build and make a building for himself or for the city. And they have this idea where they want to be like, this Western building, right? So that's another challenge. Then there are challenges like policies that we have at the government level, and then there are policies and bylaws at local level, right? So the authorities would, have certain bylaws that you need to leave this much space on this side, this much should be the open space, this much should be the covered space, right? So we have those rules as well. And then I was another limitation that I've also addressed in my research is about plot sizes, right? So I have been working specifically at the start of my research on residential architecture. And so I was looking at traditional architecture and also as contemporary architecture and how it has changed and how we can learn things from tradition and incorporate them into contemporary times to make it more sustainable, right? So, if you look at the Havelis, their proportions of the site and, our plotting at this time is very different, right? So one canal house is usually 50 feet by 90 feet, right? So you have that rectangle already a limitation that you need to work in these proportions, right? And then you would have these bylaws from the local authorities saying that, oh, you need to leave 5 feet open space on 3 sides, and you need to leave 10 feet open space from the front side. So you have that limitation as well. And then, so these kind of things, and I do feel that architects need to work with the local authorities and with the government to, discuss these issues and make these things more flexible, so they have more room to create and come up with new ideas and try to explore their own creative minds and see what better solutions we can come up with.
Interesting. Do you think the growing population, and I'm talking about Pakistan and Pakistan alone here, do you think the growing population could also be one of the challenges, because that the real estate that we have is limited, and if the population keeps growing, that would obviously affect the size of individual plots and houses?
Yes, it definitely it has an impact, growing population, not just on real estate, but on all of our resources, our food, our water, our energy needs, and that all comes down to sustainable living. And all of these are part of your building, part of your life, and architecture is part of your life. So yes, growing population is a challenge, and we do discuss, when it comes to urban design, we do discuss, you know, strategies like going vertically rather than, you know, sprawling horizontally, like what is happening in the case of Lahore as well, that we're constantly expanding towards the south. Southern Lahore, and we see all these housing schemes popping up here and there, and we're, you know, again, we're taking up agricultural land. That's again another natural resource exploitation to construct. So there is this discourse on densifying the already existing cities and going vertically rather than going horizontally. So urban designers, planners, and architects do discuss these kind of strategies. And we are currently in Lahore also in the process of designing a master plan for 2050 for the city. And I'm very glad to see that this time, I think it's for the first time ever, that Lahore Development Authority has invited all the citizens of the city to come and participate in the design process of the city. So they have been doing participatory workshops and participatory events in different areas of the city, and invited people to come and look at the design and comment on the design and put up their questions and concerns to the design committee, so that feedback from the people is also there when design is being made, which I think is a big achievement and a very good thing as well, and also an opportunity for us, the citizens, to participate and tell the designer, you know, this is what we want. These are the problems that we're facing, and this is what we think should be addressed.
No, that is indeed very commendable, you know, given if the feedback of the citizens would actually be incorporated into the designs, then that is a great step. Talking about designs, Rabia, help me understand, what is the difference between green buildings and sustainable buildings? Because I read somewhere that you said that green buildings does not necessarily mean sustainable building.
Right. So that again, you know, when I said my idea of sustainability completely changed when I went to the US. So that was one big major turning point, right? Because I had also thought that sustainability, like most people do, that sustainability is just about, you know, carbon emissions and energy efficiency, and that's it. And that, you know, that would be sustainability. But when I went there, I learned that it is so much more. And that even it was not just me who thought this way, but they're actually, you know, it's a common phenomena that, you know, okay, so sustainability is just about green strategies. And I read this book, Shape of Green by Lance Jose, and he talks about how there's a difference between, you know, green building and great building. Like, you know, architects would say, oh, this is a green building, and what we've designed is a great building, right? So what he mentioned was that is basically implying that green buildings are ugly buildings, right? And that they just have solar panels, and that they're just focused on cost and performance, and they're not concerned about aesthetics or beauty, right? So what he was mentioning was that there's this difference when it shouldn't be there, right? And because life of many things is dependent on, you know, how desirable they are. And we see that in nature as well, that the survival is dependent on the form and the shape, right? So like from the color of the birds, or the, you know, we look at the scents of the flowers, or the taste of the food determines their survival. And similarly is the case with our things as well. If something is made to endure, it must also be lovable. And when we become emotionally attached to something, we regard it as beautiful, and we take care of it, and we preserve it. We just don't trash it, right? And in order for anything to survive and sustain, it is important that it becomes lovable, that we love it, we find it aesthetically pleasing, we find it beautiful. So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, you could make a building which is zero carbon and zero energy, and if people don't like it, it's not pleasing, people don't want to be in it, don't want to live in it, it's going to get abandoned, right? And it will go to waste. So it is important to find that balance where green buildings are also great buildings and great buildings are also green buildings. So that's what I.
Interesting. So if I got you right, green building was the terminology being used for buildings that were perhaps meeting the criteria of the utility aspect of, energy efficiency and sustainability, but were somehow ignoring the aesthetics and, the pleasant, aesthetics of the building, right? And
Yes.
then for something to be considered completely sustainable in the field of architecture, what you're saying is we shouldn't just think about utility, we should also think about aesthetics. We shouldn't just think about aesthetics, we should also think about utility, find a right balance.
Right. Yes. And that is what my work has been on as well, to find how to find that balance, So I've been working on a conceptual guide that my professor had curated about sustainable design. And for that, that conceptual framework looks at design from three different aspects. So we're looking at the function, which is, the orientation of the building, how is it oriented towards the sun? We're looking at the building materials, the construction methods, and if it's meeting the user requirements, right? And if it's comfortable enough, the indoor temperature and outside as well, right? And then at the second step, it looks at the building type, and also if the building has that sense of history and that sense of place and that sense of connection with that culture and the people. And then also that it's well connected with nature. And lastly, the last aspect of this framework is to look at universal beauty, right? So universal beauty is not subjective to a person, like you find it beautiful and I don't. It's not subjective. It's not that. Universal beauty is something which is eternal. Like we all know that it's beautiful, right? So if that beauty has been achieved through geometry, proportion, or through spatial polarities and other design strategies that I talk about in my work to achieve that as well. So through these three different expanding on what you were saying earlier, I have been working to develop that to help architects and designers, guide themselves towards sustainable design.
That sounds wonderful, actually. And I guess I'm just going to end this conversation on the note of just, wishing you all the best, because this is like not a small feat to, achieve. And it's going to take obviously a long time for that to happen. So all the best with everything that you're doing, Rabia. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.